Hey, Rising Church, welcome to another round of Groves. We're in week 6, so we're coming to kind of the back end of our series as we continue in 1 Peter and 2 Peter. It's interesting because when you actually dive into 1st, 2 Peter, you understand that Peter is talking to the believers about suffering. And suffering is not something that we are really super familiar with or comfortable with, probably as believers, especially in the West. We kind of believe we need to escape all suffering and kind of avoid all suffering. And yet here, Peter's just being blunt honest. He's saying, look, as a follower of Jesus who doesn't fit in with the culture and society anymore, who's different, it's like you're going to face some suffering. You're going to face some persecution. And so he's kind of preparing them for what is coming ahead. It's interesting because in the past, we've done a study in Revelation, and we called it, if you remember, some of you guys weren't around yet, but we actually called it, It's the End of the World as We Know It. And I feel fine. Hopefully you know that reference. But this idea that in the book of Revelation, a lot of us think of it as being a scary book. And it's like, about the end times. And it's like, like a horror film, like something like that. When the reality is the book of Revelation was written to give us hope. And it's interesting because when you look at the book of Revelation, you kind of look at the breadth of it. It's actually similar to the book of Isaiah because both of these books do the same thing, is they kind of show like, here's all the chaos and mess going on in the world. And then things up in heaven. And everything's great, and everything's peaceful, and everything's good. And then chaos, mess down here, and then peace. Chaos, peace, right? And it just keeps going back and forth between those two things, again, in Revelation and in Isaiah, because this idea that if you know where you're going in the end, then you can bring that peace that is experienced in heaven, you can bring it here. And it's kind of similar to what Peter's doing here in 1st and 2 Peter. He's saying, even no matter what's going on in this world, no matter what kind of suffering you may face, no matter what kind of persecution may come, look, you're good. You have an inheritance. Look up. Look at what's coming, because that's what's going to help you endure whatever is going on here, and hopefully do more than just endure, but also enjoy life, enjoy what you have in front of you. And so today we're going to be going into the back half of chapter 3, verses 8 through 22, where he's going to be talking about, okay, well, now what? In fact, he just talked about last week, we talked about this word submission and this idea that we yield to one another, or we arrange ourselves under these different authorities, not because they deserve it or not because they are owed it, but because of Jesus, on account of Jesus. He says that in verse 13 of chapter 2, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Don't do it for their sake. Do it for Jesus' sake, on account of Jesus. Because of Jesus, this should be our attitude as followers of Jesus, that we will be willing to yield and to submit in that sense to others, not because we have to, but because we choose to. And then he says this in chapter 3, verse 8. He says, finally, which is a massive transition word. What it really means is it means to sum it all up. He's all, based on what I just told you, to kind of sum up what I've been saying, here's what I want you to do. All of you. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate, be humble. Don't repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called. This is what Jesus has called you, invited you, summoned you to. And it's interesting because all the things that he just said are super countercultural to Roman culture. None of those things are valued in Roman culture. Loving people, being sympathetic, being compassionate, being humble, not repaying evil with evil. None of those were valued in Roman culture. And to be honest with you, I don't know if they're really valued too much today either. Because if you kind of think about Roman culture, what you know of Roman culture. When you think of Roman culture, maybe you think of like Gladiator, right? You think of Gladiator, you think of these movies from those times, right? Was it a very sympathetic culture? If you're going to put somebody in the Colosseum in Rome and the whole point is for them to battle to the death, is that super sympathetic? Is that like loving them? Is that about humility? Is that about repaying blessing or repaying evil and insult with blessing? No. It's like a dog-eat-dog world. It's like they celebrated that. They actually took early believers in Jesus during the persecution of Nero, and they would like use them as the torches in the Colosseum, because they didn't care about people. They didn't have compassion towards people. So when people saw them burning or saw entire families being consumed by the lions, they didn't have any sympathy, because they just like, who cares? But he's saying, no. To sum it all up, you're not supposed to look like the culture and be like what the world is like. You're supposed to look different. And so you're supposed to be sympathetic. You're supposed to love each other. You're supposed to be compassionate. You're supposed to lower yourself and be humble and not be prideful. And he says this, says, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. That's a tough one. I think we have three options, and there's three kind of ways to, how do you deal with suffering? How do you deal with people who are against you? How do you deal with people that persecute you? How do you deal with people that do evil towards you? One is the first one is kind of you can return evil for good, which is, I would say, is kind of like satanic. That's just evil. When somebody does good to you, you try to hurt them. That's not a good thing, right? There's return evil for evil, which is kind of a human thing. That's just what we naturally do. If you, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, you hurt me, I hurt you back, right? There's that. And then there's return good for evil. And that's divine. That can only come from the power of God in you to return good for evil. And he says, this is what you're called to, because that's what Jesus did for you. Jesus didn't give you evil for your good. He didn't return your evil for evil. He returned your evil for good. And he gave you good when you didn't deserve it. And so that's what he's saying. That's what it means to follow Jesus in a world when you may face some persecution. You may get beat up. You may have people say mean things against you. You may have people look down on you. It's like that needs to be our attitude. That needs to be the way we look at things. And I love what he says in verse 10, for whoever would love life and see good days. He's saying, look, your goal isn't to avoid life. It's not to escape life. It's not to just kind of endure life as a burden. He's like, you're supposed to enjoy life. If you want to see good life, then here's the way to do it, even if you do suffer, which is what you're going to talk more about as you unpack the rest of the chapter, is like you may suffer for doing good, but in the end, you're good. What do you got to lose? No matter what they do to you, you're still good, because you know what's coming, and because this is not everything there is, and because you're looking forward to an inheritance that will never perish, spoil, or fade. Going back to the Isaiah and the Revelation thing, it may be chaos and it may be difficult here, but you have something to look forward to that makes it so that you can survive this and you can endure it. And so therefore, you can be this way. You can be contrary and be different than the culture and the world around you. You can repay evil with good. And you can be sympathetic towards others. You can love other people ahead of yourself. You can bless people when they curse you. It's like that is an option for you because you have a hope that is beyond all this. And so that's kind of the direction he's going today. Hopefully, as you discuss this, you're going to be able to unpack it a little bit more. But that's the idea. The bigger idea is he's trying to get us to understand that we can have a different attitude when we face persecution and difficulty. And it's actually when we have that different attitude, when we face these difficult times, that actually is a witness to the people out there that there's something different about us that is appealing to them. Even when they're trying to knock us down, they're like, well, wait a minute. Why do these people have such hope? Why do they have such hope no matter what's going on in their lives, no matter what we're doing to them? Why are they staying strong? Where do they get that strength from? So hopefully that will give you enough to chew on for this week, and we will check back in with you next week for week 7.